Well, hi there, it's me, Penny. Welcome back to my practice room for this video where we're going to deconstruct the rhythm in Prelude number 22 in B flat minor. This is from Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier, BWV 867, music by J.S. Bach. Now, I performed this piece for you 2 videos ago with an overhead view and a view of my sheet music with all my markings in it. And you could see, I think you could tell from your comments anyway, that performance was quite focused on voicing. And I want to perform this prelude with its corresponding fugue back to back in the near future. And so, as I've since been practicing the piece, it came to my brain, knocking on my brain's door, the rhythm of this piece. And I was very curious about this rhythm. Now, if this prelude were a wet sponge, and we were going to wring it out into our bucket, we would get a whole bunch of droplets of this rhythm. Over and over and over again, this whole piece is saturated with that rhythm. And incidentally, if you're interested in some of the influence behind Bach's composition of this piece, you can check out a video. I'll link it up here in a card as well in the description. Because this rhythm comes from a prelude in F major from Suite number 2, by Johann Caspar Ferdinand Fischer, who was a predecessor of Bach. He was born approximately 30 years before Bach, circa 1656, and Bach was heavily influenced by Fischer's music. This prelude of his, which I've also performed a while back, I'll link to that as well up here and down below. That little prelude in F major comes from his collection of suites for keyboard known as Das Musikalische Blumenbüchlein. It's Opus 2 from 1699. I'm not going to play that for you here. As I say, I've linked to that performance. But the rhythm of this B-flat minor prelude from Mr. B comes from that prelude of Mr. F. And incidentally, Mr. F, Mr. Fischer, influenced Bach on more than one occasion, and the subject of Bach's E major fugue, number 9 from Book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier, is basically borrowed, note for note practically, from a Fischer fugue, also in E major from his Ariadne Musica. George Friedrich Handel was also influenced by Fischer. But this is not a video about Fischer. This is a video, as I say, about deconstructing the rhythm of this prelude in B-flat minor. So as I was practicing it, I wanted to explore what the piece would sound like if I extracted all of the statements of this particular rhythm. 2 16th notes followed by an 8th note. Now I said the rhythm that is saturating this piece is this. You know, there's 3 8th notes preceded by 2 16ths. But fundamentally, it's those opening notes of that rhythm, the 2 16ths and the 8th, which to me are like the engine. All the energy of that entire rhythm is concentrated in those first 3 notes. And so I wanted to see what this piece would sound like if I extracted all of that. Now you'll see on the screen here a very colorful version of the sheet music. This is from my Henley edition. And in purple, I have highlighted each one of those little rhythms, the 2 16ths followed by the 8th. Now, to make it a little easier to read, I'm going to show you my manuscript copy where I wrote down by hand, it was very tedious, all the statements of those purple markings. All the statements of that short, tiny little rhythm of, okay? Because I was so curious. The rhythm, it's so simple, right? There's nothing difficult or complex, fancy about this. And yet, this music is incredibly rich and expressive and deep and thoughtful and almost transcendental, mystical. It's a musical escapism, as I like to call it. And Bach, as I often say, has a tendency, I'm noticing, of using a simple rhythm over and over and over again, and yet it's almost like we're being hypnotized. We don't quite realize that we're hearing this simple rhythm because the variety and the complexity, the character and individuality, the contour of the intervals, namely, and the register of the instrument that's used, and the harmonies, the accidentals, chromaticism, all of this just like kind of inflames that simple rhythm, and we get this supercharged emotional experience. But yet, fundamentally, the rhythmic skeleton of Bach's music is very often just something quite simple, as in the case here. Right? So that is very curious to me. We could take as a fine example the D major prelude from Book 1, the one that goes like this. The right hand has non-stop sixteenths for virtually the whole piece, just a little bit at the end where it changes, and the left hand straight eighth notes. One more example, and there are countless. I'm thinking of the Invention number 10 in G major. Right? And in fact, in that case, both hands have the same rhythm, and it's just endless triplets, right? And of course, what gives it its interest are the changes in the contour, the different intervals. Sometimes the hands are going the same direction, up, down. Sometimes they're going contrary motion, little ornaments here and there. You know, you don't even realize you're listening to such a simple little rhythm. It's like, it just blows my mind. And so, let me stop talking and play at last for you this rhythmic skeleton of this B flat minor prelude, okay? Just every time it occurs in this piece, and then I'll tell you what I noticed about it. Here we go. Okay, isn't that fascinating, right? Gosh, it could stand as a piece on its own with all those other notes removed, right? Oh, I love it. And I went to town with my data here. I counted the number of times that rhythm ascends, descends, or does something else, like a neighbor tone or movement by something other than step. And what I found was that the majority, most of those rhythms, are ascending. And interestingly, the sections of this piece, if we look at the first section as being measure 1 to the middle of 7, and then middle of 7 to the downbeat of 20 as the middle section, and then the rest of measure 20 to the end, in measure 24 as the final section, then we can say, because I counted, that the outer sections of this piece are dominated by ascending statements of that little rhythm. And then the middle section, middle of 7 to downbeat of 20, this is dominated by descending statements of the rhythm. Now, I thought that was interesting. I don't know if Bach planned it. I presume he did, but it seems like such a little undercurrent, subtle thing. Who knows? But it does strike me as, significant that the middle section is dominated by descending statements of that rhythm. The piece is in B flat minor, and I'm not sure anyone would argue that this key, B flat minor, is anything but dark and kind of very brooding and gray and ominous and mysterious. I love B flat minor. We don't get to play in this key very often, and I have in my notes too the prelude and fugue from this book 1. This is number 22, and also the B flat minor prelude in book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. These are the only instances, as far as I know, that Bach wrote anything in B flat minor. So that is interesting too. Of course, it's his initial. But B flat minor, very dark, somber, ominous key, right? But yet at the end, what do we get? We get a Picardy third, we get major, B flat major, which suggests to me a feeling of hopefulness. I don't want to read too much into literal, minor mode is sad, major mode is happy. I think that's a little simplistic. There are so many shades of gray in here. But here, I do feel that there's a sense of hopefulness in that major, B flat major at the very end. So then that kind of goes hand in hand with the direction of these rhythms, because I think, generally speaking, that if a rhythm is ascending, it's a little bit more feeling of like, I'm speaking as a human here, not as a musician, that if something is going up, it's like you're making effort, you're working to climb that mountain, like you're making tangible steps and progress, and you're hopeful. The load you're carrying may be heavy, but you're working to overcome. You're doing your best. You're working hard, and you're making progress. Whereas if the music is descending a lot, going down, it kind of suggests a little bit. Oh, the struggle is getting a little bit more so. Right? So when we combine those two things with the fact that the rhythm in the middle section is, not that it doesn't have any ascending statements in the middle section, it does. And for that matter, the outer sections also have descending statements of the rhythm. But it does strike me as interesting that the middle section is dominated by descending statements of the rhythm, and the outer sections dominated by ascending statements, with that piece, with the piece ending in the major, B flat major. So there's a kind of like, I get the sense that when the piece is starting, it's already, a little bit full of some despair, right? If I play it as written. Erwin Bodke talks about the religious nature of this prelude and fugue. And I myself am not religious, but I translate that to mean spiritual. And yes, this piece to me is far more spiritual and contemplative in nature than, say, the D major prelude with all its youthful, bubbling vitality and energy. So that mood is already quite somber in the opening, but it gets more so, I think, in the middle, especially as we get going into the piece. Measure 10. And then at 15, you can hear how they're all going down, mostly, right? And then there at measure 18, it's the thickest moment of the piece. We're still in that middle section before we get measure 20, this return of the main section with its ascending, predominantly ascending statements of the rhythm, and then finally that major mode. So that is one thing that I noticed, which I would never have noticed had I not just written this out, these rhythms, which is that, as they say, the rhythm is kind of matching an emotional storytelling that the other non-rhythmic aspects of the piece are telling. Now, this is just a pianist's perspective. I'm not a theorist or analyst, musicologist by any stretch of the imagination, but these are things that I notice. They supercharge my battery. They give me a boost of like, excitement, and they make me want to practice more. So I think that's a good thing. If you can find things in the music that make you want to practice more, you're onto something. Now, let's get back to the opening of this piece. Again, just the rhythmic reduction. In the first 2.5 bars, listen to how much silence there is between each statement of the rhythm. Right? Bach is aware, I assume, of the listener. And when he wrote this piece, people would not have heard it before. So they're hearing it for the first time. You may be hearing it for the first time. And he is, if this were a musical entree, a dish on a plate that Bach were serving us to eat, he is giving us really nicely sized portions. And if Bach were a waiter or a host at a meal, he would be a very, very skillful host or waiter, because he's giving us time to digest this little musical idea, in this case a rhythmic idea. Wouldn't it be bizarre if he started the piece with non-stop statements of that rhythm like we get in the middle of measure 3? On and on it goes. There's no space between them as we had in the beginning. Rest, 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 rest. So, it's like he's aware of the listener's attention span at the beginning of a piece, when the listener doesn't know what's going to be coming into their ears, what's coming at them. It's all question marks. So he's very smart in just giving us this main little idea a few times with some space in between, before then making it more constant, right? And I find this just so clever. The other analogy that came to my mind is that if this piece were, let's pretend this piece was a musical, like a house or a little castle or some kind of an abode, a dwelling, right? And I can imagine at the doorway of this beautiful, curious-looking place, Bach is standing there waving at us, and you and me, we're over there on the sidewalk. We're looking in from afar, and we're wondering, what's in that building? What is in that musical prelude? What is there to listen to and to taste? Ooh, I'm curious, right? And instead of Bach, racing to the sidewalk, grabbing you and me by the collar and forcing us into this house to say, listen to this piece, listen to this musical ideas that I have here, he is very gently just kind of, motioning us with his finger and a little smile, maybe a little wink. Come on, I got some musical treats for you, right? In this prelude number 22. Come on. It's like a friendly invitation to the piece by having these rests in between the statements of those opening ascending rhythms. Because then it gets going, and by that time we're familiar with the rhythm. So that is something else. Also, too, you notice in the opening, those statements in the first 2.5 bars with all the rests, there's just no more than 2 voices, and they're both moving by third, and they're very close together. Of course, I'm changing the fingering here because I've left out probably 40% of the notes. But they're close together, and they're in this moderately upper range of the instrument. Then, when those rests go away in the middle of measure 3 through 7, the rest of this first section, where we're getting continuous statements of over and over again, you notice that the hands start to go into more of the middle register of the keyboard. Down here, and then we go as far as measure 6 when we go down to that F below middle C. Quite a far distance from up here playing around in angel land kind of thing. Getting more down to earth here, the ground kind of thing. And also in this remaining part of the first section, middle of 3 through 7, the hands not only get further apart and lower into the register, but also they're no longer moving by thirds. Sometimes they're moving by sixth, as in measure 4, and sometimes they're moving in contrary motion. And there's also a lot of juxtaposing of high, low, high, low. Right? So there's more activity, more attention expected of the listener. Not a whole lot of responsibility was placed on the listener in those opening 2.5 bars, right? We also get an added third voice for a moment in this rhythm in middle of 6, okay? So that takes us to the end of this first section, and then middle of measure 7, we begin the middle section, which, as I say, is dominated by descending statements of this rhythm. We're in the middle section of the piano here. We go lower and lower. But you notice he's giving us the rests again, like we had in the beginning. And so, because this is a new section, that to me kind of, again, Bach is aware of the listener's attention. And okay, here's where the story is going to, the plot's going to thicken, musically speaking, so I want to kind of warm my listener up and provide some space before then the rhythm becomes constant in measure 10. And that's kind of a shock too, that tritone at the beginning of measure 12. Measure 12, we get some more of those rests. But this descending motion, moving more, down into the bowels of the keyboard instrument, with hands further apart and more accidentals. It's the middle is starting to heat up. But then he's not giving us the most intense moment, which is coming up at 18. He gives us another little moment of relief for our ears, our weary ears, right? He gives us this little sequence in measure 13. And this is very much in the same register as in the opening, and with predominantly the 2 voices moving by thirds, but without the rests in between. And then we get the the pot starts to boil. The story starts to, we're nearing the climax there in 15. Through that, 15 and 16 to beginning of 17, again, this high, low, high, low, high, low. And with different combinations of like hands moving in opposite direction, every time it's something new, right? Compare this, what you just heard, with the same amount of music, but at the beginning. One is far more intricate and active, even though it's still the same rhythm and the same tempo and everything. And which that 15, as I say, is leading to the thickest moment of the piece. So far, it's been mostly just two voices of this rhythm at a time. Occasionally three voices, like in the middle of measure 6. But we're leading to the thickest moment of the piece, and that is measure 18, which I think is the climax of the piece, and we get as many as 4 voices at a time there. Let me start at 17, and there are no rests here. The rhythm is just constant, back to back. We're building. The pot is boiling. The water is boiling. And then we have that nice arrival on B flat. We're in F major. And again, I'm not a theorist, but I feel this from the end of beat 1 in measure 20 through to the end as the final section of the piece, because we're back to that opening rhythm with the rests. Also, this has the, as we said, the predominance of ascending statements of that rhythm. And it's where we're also moving, as in the beginning, with those parallel thirds fairly high up in the register, but ultimately arriving on this diminished 7th chord with a fermata, no less, which is kind of then setting us up for this final sort of slowing down of the engine. Car is like pulling up into the driveway. It's gotten off of the busy highway and it's like on the neighborhood quiet street pulling into the driveway. Right, with that return of mostly ascending statements of the rhythm and the Picardy third for B flat major, bringing us a little bit of sunlight from B flat minor. So those are the things that I noticed, and one can only be aware of so much information as one is performing, right? You saw in my other performance of this piece, I had all those voicings I was working to bring out, and but it like you put this stuff in your brain, and then you let it sit there, and you go to bed, you sleep too, and these ideas, they kind of like cook subconsciously in the pot there, the mental pot, and the brain kind of synthesizes the ideas to a degree, and it comes through subconsciously. It provides you practice a lot. So I hope you find these ideas interesting, and that you might even try playing this rhythmic skeleton at your piano, particularly if you're working on this piece. And as I say, I want to perform it alongside the fugue, and certainly this awareness, which I didn't have before, of the rhythm and its development, dramatically speaking, from start to finish, is going to impact, I think, my performance in the end. I'm also thinking about tempo of the fugue, too. And so this is going to factor into all of that. But I got to wrap this up. Happy practicing to you. Thank you, as always, for watching. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon for more explorations of Bach's music. Take care. Bye-bye.